Omakase, the life and words of author M. Karen. If this is our first time meeting each other, let me give you a brief introduction. My name is Max. I write books for a living. I recently had a long trip to San Francisco, and I spent a lot of time in trains. What did I do in those trains? I read a lot of books. By the way, my pronouns are they, them. And in case you're wondering, yes, I read a bunch of books while on the train. All of them were bad. In other news, I hate books now. Hey there! Welcome! Welcome to Omakase. That's not true, I don't hate books. I just hate those two books I read. Literally in between going to San Francisco and coming back from San Francisco. It feels good to be back, just devouring books like it's nothing. But also those books weren't very good. They will go unnamed for the time being, for very obvious reasons. But before we get anywhere else, hi there. This is my writing advice and inspiration podcast, Omakase. My name is Max, also known as M. Karen. Silly times will be had today, but also insightful times. Today we're gonna have a weird video, because today we're not gonna have a prompt. You see, the regular podcast format goes like this. I tell you a little bit about my week, then I tackle viewer questions, and then we do a prompt, some sort of creative exercise to get you thinking about writing. But today, I basically have 2.5 writing questions, and I know I'm gonna go long, so I figured, you know what? Let's go all in. Let's dedicate ourselves fully this week to these writing questions. But first, before I even touch on my week, 2 pieces of housekeeping. The same as always, the song that you hear at the beginning and at the end of the show is titled Dream of Green, or is it Dreams of Green? Dreams of Green, by the OC Jazz Collective and OCRemix.org. There's a link to it in the description below, as well as a link to a one-time donation so you can treat me to a cup of coffee and help me make more of this podcast. Alright, housekeeping out of the way. Let's go into segment number 1. My week. Where have I been? What have I been doing? What have I been up to? And of course, what have I been doing? Creatively speaking. I've been editing. I feel like I'm getting to the top of the metaphoric mountain, and once I get to the peak, then the story will be ready to be packaged and sent to my beta readers, and that's exciting. Terrifying, but also exciting. I've been editing. I have a really small note about an editing session that I had a few days back where I spent an entire day just, I thought I was going to do a pass of the novel, just reading through it, semi-casually looking for anything I might have missed, and instead I spent the entire day revising Chapter 1. Chapter 1 needed a lot of work, and upon reading it with new eyes, I realized that there was an unfortunate lack of transitioning between the points that the opening chapter wanted to get across. And it's the sort of thing where I'm looking at it and I'm like, okay, chapter 1 of this novel is pretty much telling you 3 things about the character. And, the first third, second third, and third. Oh wow, that's funny to say. Welcome back to Tongue Twisters. I'm your host, M. Karen. Parts 1, 2, and 3 of chapter 1 all kind of tell you a thing. I'm kind of overgeneralizing because I didn't sit down to write that book thinking, well, I want to tell you 3 things about the main character. It happened organically. By the way, this is foreshadowing to a point I will be making later on in the show. So when I was looking through the revision process, I realized, okay, there's these 3 things I'm saying. And the transition between the 3 of them inside of the scene doesn't quite click. And I could tell, because I was reading my writing very critically, and I was thinking, analyzing, and seeing very clear gaps. And had I not been the person who wrote the darn thing, I could have extrapolated that the story was made, or that the opening chapter was made of 3 independent scenes tied together. Of course, that's me being very critical, But I thought, okay, either A, I'm gonna move all the parts of this chapter around so that they make more sense, which I despise that option because chronologically it would stop making sense, or I add transitions. I go in between the spots that connect all these three parts of the chapter and I make sure they flow together. And that's what I did. It required a lot of restructuring, it required a lot of rephrasing several things, and one of the reasons I didn't want to just move parts around is because it doesn't make sense to, okay, story-wise, writing-wise, Max the writer wants to tell you what the location and the character looks like AS the heck P. I want you to know what the character looks like and where you are as fast as possible. Story-wise, that doesn't make much sense. Story-wise, it wouldn't make sense for the main characters to start with, by the way, I am here and this is what I look like. So I made some compromises. I decided to shift the parts of the chapter around and instead ease the transitions. I don't know if that's the most effective. It will all depend on when I come back around, when I finish this pass and I come back around and I will reread chapter 1 and I will see if those transitions worked. But yeah, I've been editing. It's been a journey. By the way, in case you're wondering, in case you hear some sort of rustling sound in the background, my cat is in the room. He is like 3 feet away from the microphone. He's napping at the current moment, so I don't expect him to be jumping all over the place. You know cats, it's either nap time or party time, and I think right now it's nap time. So in case you hear him, whining later on, in approximately 25.5 minutes, begging that I let him escape the prison in which he lives, we'll have to deal with that when we get there. Talking about being in between transitioning or transitioning from one phase to the next, I went on a small little vacation. I know! That never happens! Am Karen taking a vacation? My wife forced me. We got tickets for a concert in San Francisco, and it was a very late concert, so we decided to stay a day in San Francisco. Beautiful San Francisco. We love San Francisco. I was going to call it the city, like we're hipsters or something. I love San Francisco. 1, because it's a lovely city. 2, it's got all the things I love. 3, it's always sweater weather. It's always foggy and cold and chilly in San Francisco. Every day is sweater weather. It's the middle of summer. Summer's about to be over, I think. At least in California. And it was chilly, it was cold, it was foggy, all up until 11 in the morning. Love San Francisco. We went to a concert, and we've been to San Francisco so many times that it's come to the point where, we do shopping, we look around the shops, but we didn't really buy anything. The best part of this trip was the food. I want to go on the mental description I had of my wife and I. We found this new ramen place. Not new for us, like actually new for everyone. A Japanese ramen place. And the ramen that I had, because we both got different. We're talking about the kind of restaurant that serves only one thing. There's restaurants and they're like, here is a 7-page menu. We will literally serve you whatever you want. And that's nice. But I think there's a complete difference, a line in the sand between those and the kind of restaurants where, yeah, we have 4 dishes and this is all we make. And also we're only open for like 3 hours every single day. So we're there, it's full, we get a table, we sit down, I order the one that sounds the best to me, and I get it. And when it comes to ramen, everybody expects the centerpiece to be the noodles. But of course, that is not the case. It is the broth of the ramen that is the centerpiece. The main actor, the lead of the show. And I had never tasted broth as tasty as that. The glistening of the oil against the light of the restaurant, as though a milky galaxy encompassing tens of thousands of flavors. not so much, but that's what I was thinking. I was looking at it and seeing the light reflected on the surface of the ramen, and I thought to myself, that's like a galaxy of flavor. It was really tasty. Ironically, so Kitty's ramen, she got like the standard classic, the one that the restaurant, their specialty, their staple. I thought that broth was way better than mine. I felt bad. I was like, I should have gotten the classic. All right. Enough about the San Francisco trip. What? What's that? You want me to scream about those awful books I read? I can't do that to you. One, because I always feel bad talking about books and actually calling out the people who wrote them. But also because that would make this segment like 10 times long. I have notes. I took down notes because I was so disappointed in the books that I paid I paid money for these books and I was excited to read them, and they turned out to be very, very ineffective. We will talk about a couple of the things that made them ineffective actually in the next section. Not naturally, like it wasn't because like I didn't pick those questions because they were in tune with what I read this week. It was more a matter of like these are basic writing skills which those books lacked. And I hate saying that. I want this to be a positive podcast, but man, those books were not good. The other thing, oh man, here comes the downer part of the podcast. I had an unfortunate, well, I didn't have an unfortunate. Someone had an unfortunate time. For years, I have been swearing by a particular writing program. I have to say its name, Evernote. A program that saves your writing on the cloud so that you don't have to worry about backing it up. I've been talking about that program forever. I've made several videos on it in the last couple of years. And a couple days back, my Evernote program on Mac has been slow, dreadfully slow. And in the process of looking for advice, because, you know, I'm editing a huge manuscript, and it's just text, so the idea that just loading up this novel file is suddenly making the entire computer, you know, just stop. I believe the technical term is chug. I'm like looking for advice online, and it comes to my attention that the company that runs Evernote is having some sort of financial trouble. If you have been following Evernote, you will know that this is not the first time this has happened, but I have to agree with some of the people that I was chatting with online that it feels as though Evernote has been in a death spiral for like 5 years. So between not finding any advice for why my application is slow after doing, you know, the very easy troubleshooting, I decided, and being reminded again that Evernote is a company and not a, I guess companies are fallible and things can happen, and I have 5 years, maybe more, of writing saved on Evernote, so I thought, you know what, it's time to turn over a new leaf. So, after a lot of research, after a lot of thinking about this, because the whole point I went with Evernote was because all of my writing was automatically saved and I didn't have to lose anything. When my PC died and suffered a total hard drive failure, I felt relieved that all of my important stuff had been saved on Evernote. All of my writing from when I first began this journey, and, you know, in between stuff like the metadata for all of my videos, stuff like that. All of that stuff was saved. So I went this week through the long process of backing up every single note, every single piece of data, every single writing and image that I had saved on Evernote. And we will get to the size. It was about 5,000 to 6,000 notes in total, or 5,000 to 6,000 files that I had to export from Evernote. I recommend exporting as HTML, and if you are exporting things and you want them to stay organized, export the notebook, not the individual notes together. Because if you export notes together, they will all just be in a list arranged from the order in which they were made. And once I had all my stuff off of it, I had to, you know, sit down and think, well, where am I gonna go? Am I gonna go with another program that does the same thing? Am I gonna go with this? Am I gonna go with that? And I did so much research. I tried so many apps, and I'm like, this app looks good. oh, what? It's not actually designed for people to write fiction or just writing. It's designed more for like people who code or write blog posts. Excuse me, or social media posts. And I'm like, that's cool. I like your pricing model and your program. Unfortunately, it's not for me. And eventually, at the recommendation of one of my best friends, I decided to go back and give Scrivener another chance. I make it sound very grim, but like I actually like the other program that I believe is Literature and Latte. I forget. Lit and Latte. The company that makes Scrivener also made a mind mapping software named Scapple, and I love Scapple. I use it for role playing games and I use it for brainstorming novels. So like, I like the guys. I hadn't used Scrivener since my computer died, and the program has changed a lot. I had to watch like half of their tutorials on YouTube to get caught up, to understand. It was nice seeing like the person, the I don't want to say CEO because I don't think they're that big of a company, but the head of the developers explaining the core values of the app and explaining, how it's supposed to work. And after seeing that, I was like, okay, I can make this work for me. Those of you astute ones may notice something a little off. Scrivener is a program that just organizes your writing. It has some cloud backing up capabilities, but it's all to Dropbox, which happens to be another company. And remember again, companies are fallible. So I ended up, in case you're wondering, how is it that I am confident writing on Scrivener without fearing that I may lose data here and there? What I ended up setting up was Google Drive has a desktop application that automatically can back up folders or files in your computer. So I set that up. I believe it's called Computer and Sync. I forget. Google Backup and Sync. And I set it up so that I backed up the Scrivener backup files. Done. Every time I edit a Scrivener document, it backs it up, and it's saved on the cloud. And Google is also a company, and companies are fallible, but I'm not expecting Google to die anytime soon, so I feel a lot more safe backing my data over there. And secondly, the Google Drive default price model is 15 gigabytes for free. And in case you're wondering, Max, is 15 gigabytes enough for a writer to keep all of the writing on the internet? I'm going to give you context. I backed up every piece of writing, personal, fiction, writing for videos, writing for my other channel. I backed up everything. Diaries, journals, mind maps, bullet journals, Pomodoro sheets, taxes, everything that I had backed up, I exported it. The total file size of 5 years of making notes on Evernote amounted to 1.5 gigs. 1.5 gigabytes of 5 years. Through the course of 5 years. I'm not worried that I'm going to run out of those 15 gigs on Google Drive. So, I've gone on way too long on this segment. Consider this another great lesson on adapting to the environment around you and being proactive, not reactive. I'm not going to wait until Evernote dies. I'm not saying it's going to die. I'm not saying that it's on a death spiral. It just feels to me like it's been on a death spiral. And I don't want to wait until, I get a warning saying that I have 15 days to get all my data off of it. I will just transition now. I'm playing around with Scrivener. I'm enjoying it so far. I'm gonna hold off judgment for a little while longer. If you're interested, Scrivener's got a 30-day trial that actually only counts the days that you use it. So if you only use Scrivener once a week, it will last you for 30 weeks. Anyhow, with all this stuff being said, let's take a second to talk about the people who make this show possible. Omakase is brought to you by you, the lovely viewers who are pledging your support to my Patreon page. Patreon.com/mkaren is their #1 place to support me and what I do. by pledging just $1 a month, that is $1 right now, you get early access to all of these podcasts, as well as the ability to vote on polls and enjoy my monthly workshop a month before it goes live on YouTube, iTunes, and everywhere else. If you pledge a little more, you get cooler perks, like access to my super duper secret writing zine, shoutouts, and more. The following are some of the people who are making this show possible. Atlac! Atlac has a DeviantArt page. You can learn more about their writing and their art over at deviantart.com/AHTILAK. Isabella Doucette. Isabella has a bunch of books on Smashwords. You can head over to smashwords.com and do a search for Isabella Doucette, or you can find them by their username ILMTDOUCETTE. A. Howard, Alisa Dudley, Amelia, Angela, Brenda, Caitlin, Lishadra, Gilbert Goodrow, Irina Phoenix, Joe, Lacey, Mark Maruska, Nicola, Pat Eitson, Polly Craftwell, Soul Muse, and Synexia. And now, with all of the shoutouts done, let's move over to the second, and I guess now third segment of the podcast for this episode alone. There may be more episodes where I do a double serving of writing questions. 3 scoops of writing advice, but we'll have to see how that unravels. Don't take this as a formal change. It's just a thing for this episode, because I want to talk about all this, but I don't want to rush through it, because you know me. I like to go in depth when I answer a question, and I want to give you the best advice possible. And I thought, well, there's 3 questions. I could try rushing through them, or I could just tackle them, feature them, put them under the spotlight. And that's what I'm going to do. First off, we have a question from a writerly friend. In their question, they talked about how they have their novel planned, they're ready to go, but they feel as though there's something missing. And after looking, thinking about it, looking inside of themselves for the answer, they realized, or they thought, that the answer was to brainstorm more scenes. They felt that their story might need more things happening in it. And they were reaching out to me, asking me for advice on tactics to add more scenes to a story, or to add more scenes to an outline. Now, I touched on this a little bit on last week's episode, where I did some speed outlining before your very eyes. And one of the points that I hope they underlined was that, at least in my experience, more things always emerge through the act of writing. That's how I was talking about in the previous episode, how I gave myself like 5 characters to start the story with, knowing that more characters will show up, because more characters always show up. I'm not saying this in a cutesy kind of like, yeah, it will happen, hand wave. No, I mean it. More characters will emerge, because that's what happens. Once you let the story grow on its own, it develops, it goes into places you didn't expect, and new things emerge from it. The same goes for locations and events. I don't stress coming up with scenes for my outline, because I know that, first and foremost, I haven't written the story. I don't know the characters yet. I don't know them fully. And even if you think you know someone fully, they may surprise you during the writing process, and that's okay. So when I brainstorm scenes, I always give myself just general ideas for what I think may happen in the story. And through the act of writing, I discover whether that was true or not. I've had outlines that just, like, it was a perfect bullseye throw. I throw the dart, and it just hits it right in the center. I feel like Justine's Blood was that way. I'm like, I think this is gonna happen. Shoots it, bang, perfect. And then there's other novels One that I am not allowed to say the name of yet, where I'm like, I think this is what's gonna happen. I throw the dart, and I'm like, the dart flies off into another continent entirely. But that's what happens, though. That's part of the writing process. It doesn't make you a better or a worse writer. Because stories change. So, backing up a little bit. What is my advice for adding scenes to a story? Is it something that I've done? Not purposefully. I've always been of the mind that you shouldn't purposefully add more to a story if the story itself doesn't call for it. And I know that some people may consider that heresy, and I understand that. But I guess as someone who has embraced stories that are shorter, just by the nature of the story being a shorter story, I've just come to understand it and come to terms with it. Additional to that, I've read a lot of stories, cough cough, the 2 books I read this week, where there were pointless scenes in those books. Scenes that I, as someone who has been through the writing process, I could tell they were added just to pad out the story. They were dressed up. Those scenes were dressed up to make them look really interesting. But once I squinted my eyes and looked between the lines, I realized this scene was pointless. My tactic, the only clear advice I can offer you from my own personal experience, is that if a scene doesn't appear naturally, organically to you through the act of thinking about the story, then there's no need for you to be digging for it. I found through my writing process that ideas come to me. I find them, I'm in the middle of a scene, and I realize, oh, if I want this to happen later, well, clearly I should establish it, or clearly this is going to happen, so I should talk about it earlier, or alternatively, I get moments where I'm like, oh, I got an idea for a really cool story. Let's put that on the outline. As I've said before, writing is the act of discovery, and as though sailing away to a journey across the sea, you're not gonna get to where you want to be without a couple of detours. But let's say you want to add a scene to your story. Let's say you just want to do it. What is my advice for that? The 2 things that I want to add is that this scene that you're adding should be meaningful to the story. It should add something to the story, and it should immediately feel natural. I talked earlier about how during the revision process of the first chapter of this novel, I had to ease the transition between the 3 parts of a chapter. Even when you have the best of intentions, you're still going to have to ease the transition between chapters and scenes. And that's what happens. That's a part of the process. But it helps to come into this additional scene, considering how is it that it connects to the rest of the story, and what does it bring to the overall experience. I guess as a way to get this off my chest, the most obvious example that I can think of one of the books that I read this week that was very ineffective at adding additional scenes, and which they just felt like they were padding. There was a particular scene in the novel. It's a fantasy novel, and the party of adventurers are in an underground system of tunnels because they've taken a detour along their magical journey. And this chapter goes on great lengths about the dangers that lay inside of these tunnels, the monsters, the creatures that lie there that no one knows their names of, goes on and on about this ancient species of rat people and the plagues that they carry in them and how dangerous they are. And then the characters camp, and then it's the next morning, and they're out of the tunnels, and that scene's over. And I'm like, what was even the point? What was the point of talking about how dangerous all these creatures are when the characters just don't encounter them? It felt like padding. The characters didn't have any character moments in that. They didn't converse about anything new. They didn't share any particularly new insights. They didn't learn anything new about each other or themselves. It just felt like, if you don't mind me being crimson, it felt like a waste of time. It felt like all this process of setting up things that eventually don't happen, and it wasn't satisfying. So consider, as I mentioned in the past, learning from bad examples. What's the best additional scene you can add to your story? Well, one that feels meaningful, one that feels natural to the story, and one that the reader, such as myself, can't just look at it and say, well, if this scene wasn't in the novel, nothing would change. One of the other little tips that I want to add in here before I move over to the next question is that having consequences carry through from chapter to chapter really helps. This is something you may have to add in revision, but like one of the things that like stung the most about those 20-30 pages of nothing that I had to sit through in that novel was that no one ever talked about that tunnel ever again. No one talked about those creatures ever again. Since the characters didn't talk about anything, it feels as though it was entirely inconsequential. Don't make that scene inconsequential. That's, of course, a silly thing to say because you wouldn't do that on purpose. If you're asking this question, you're self-conscious enough to think about it and to think about it critically. So, when you want to add, if you're looking at the outline, if you really must add a scene, make sure that it is important, something meaningful happens, and consider the consequences that carry through from that scene onwards into the rest of the story. And now, for something completely different. Recently, a few episodes back, I was talking about dialogue tags. And I recently got a question from a viewer, and it's the sort of question that I understand where it comes from. And I figured that today I would finally, I would put this question to rest. And ironically, the answer is not even about the question itself. Because the question was in regards to, when I was talking about dialogue tags, I recommended using said as a great way to show who's talking without needing to rely on ineffective or otherwise very overt ways of telling the reader who's talking, because said is effectively invisible, and it lets the reader know who's talking without adding any particular color or without just slowing down the narrative just for the sake of telling you who's talking. The person asking the question also brought up the point of my advice regarding adverbs, and adverbs, of course, are a particular type of phrase. You will know them because they end in ly, and adverbs are kind of a shorthand for description. They are not very effective because they're a shorthand for description. So this person was asking, Max, if we're supposed to use said, but we're not supposed to use adverbs, how are we supposed to add color to the dialogue? And to this, I take a step back. And I guess this is something that's changed because of ever since I have changed over to the podcast format. Because back when I did videos, I always had a little bit of a little segment at the start of the questions that went something like this: the following is my advice, my opinion, and what works for me. Don't take it as gospel. Instead, take it as the ramblings of a silly person who looks like this. Or rather, a silly person who sounds like this. I used to say that all the time, and I felt that it helped because I never got anybody yelling at me like I've been yelled at in the last 15 episodes. That's not true. That's facetious. That's a joke. I think that I think I try to do as best of a job as possible when it comes to talking about writing advice, but I always try to stress the point of what I'm trying to do with the writing advice. The point, the overall goal that I'm trying to establish through my tips, through my recommendations, and through my experience that I'm relaying to you. When I was talking about dialogue tags, my purpose wasn't to tell you to never use anything else but said. And my purpose wasn't to tell you to never have untagged dialogue. The reason behind that piece of advice, and I felt that I stressed it, but I will stress it again, is that if you need to tag dialogue, especially when you have multiple people talking in the same scene, when we have like 3-4 people, One of the books that I read had like 4 people talking back to back and there were no dialogue tags. It was madness. I couldn't believe my eyes. For the situations like that, I recommend Set. It's super easy, it's super straightforward, and it lets the reader know who's talking. Now, why do we not use adverbs? Adverbs are a really quick way to let the reader know, or to attempt to let the reader know what something is. But I feel that adverbs most of the time fall flat on their face because you tell the reader what to imagine instead of helping them imagine it themselves. I think the worst example, like my favorite example of the worst example of an adverb is she said, comma, romantically, which might be the most pointless piece of description ever. Because it feels as though like, hey, reader, imagine her saying that in a romantic way. I'm not gonna bother describing it though, so you picture, just imagine whatever romance looks like to you. And that's the problem with adverbs. Adverbs kind of group things together and they serve as a shortcut. Not all adverbs are bad, though. The one adverb that always gets a pass with me is quickly. So, I've given you a little bit of revised opinion on dialogue tags and adverbs. Now let's put them together. What if you want to describe how a person is talking? I'm pretty sure I mentioned it in the podcast where I was talking about this, but like the reason why I like to use said when I need to tag dialogue is that it saves up those other descriptive tags for when I really need them. If a character really is shouting, I can have the dialogue tag for that piece of dialogue be they shouted. If a character is actually whispering to another person and it is meaningful to the story and I want the reader to know that they're whispering, I can have that dialogue tag be, she whispered. Just make sure that you're not tacking on romantically at the end of that. She whispered romantically. Whatever that may mean. What I'm trying to get across with this is that I'm not offering you hard rules. I've never offered you hard rules. I've always offered you what works for me. I always try to phrase my advice as I, and like what I do, and what I have found to be the most effective. Because at the end of it all, I don't so much want you, like let's look at the previous question. I don't so much want you to make sure that a new scene is meaningful and natural, as much as to understand that when you add a scene without any immediate connection to what's happening in the story and nothing of value is added to it, that scene becomes ineffective, and that scene can make the reader feel as though it's padding, as though it's just there to make the book longer, and as though it's a waste of time. I always try to teach values, no matter how sappy that may sound sometimes. I want to tell you values, things to acknowledge and learn and keep in mind. It's not so much you said because it's good, is you said because it's a really easy way to tell someone what person is talking during this piece of dialogue, because not having dialogue tags can lead to confusion if you have several people talking. It's not a rule because I don't want you to use said if you don't have to. Sometimes, and I've said this before, a piece of untagged dialogue at the end of a chapter as a cliffhanger is great. Like, I'm just thinking about, like, a chapter ending with a piece of dialogue, no tags, just the dialogue by itself, and it's, the antagonist finally catches up with the main character, and the chapter ends with quotation marks. Did you think I wouldn't find you? Period. End chapter. And I'm like, oh! You don't have to always tag the dialogue. What matters here is to make it the most effective, because what are we here for? To tell good stories. It isn't about hard rules, and we'll touch on that more on the next question. It isn't about hard rules. It's about looking at your story, looking at your writing, and asking yourself, what am I saying here? This is something that I struggled with recently when I was editing the book that I've been working on. When I was doing the first pass, there was a passage that I really liked because it sounded really cool, and I had some really good prose in there. But when I finally sat down and I looked at it critically, I realized that I wasn't saying anything of value. In fact, I was saying something contradictory to the main character's values. I was saying something that just sounded cool without thinking about it. And when you go into revision, in the first draft, just get it out there. Just write the story. But when it comes to revision, you have to look at what you're saying and be critical about it. Because yeah, you can have that cool sentence, but you have to keep this in mind. And I know, but the reader will be paying attention. The reader will be taking everything in. And if they're paying attention, they realize, yo, why did the narrator say this about the main character when she's never been like that? She's never said anything like that. She's never like alluded to being like this kind of person. The narration is painting her to be this way. That matters. It isn't just a passage that sounds cool. To the reader, it will be the story. So, before I move over to the next question, because we'll talk more about, perceived rules, I want you, at the end of it all, to look at your writing. Especially when you're revising. When you're writing the first draft, have the adverbs. Don't have dialogue tags if that's what you need to finish the first draft. That's fine by me. Because trust me, you will edit that story no matter what, so that's fine. That's fine. But when it comes to the revision, you have to be critical about it. Sometimes you will have to tag the dialogue, even if, you think that it's obvious. And sometimes, through feedback, you realize that it's so obvious who's talking that you don't have to tag this particular passage of the story. That's what happens. It's part of the process. But it's not so much about, mechanically looking at rules and applying them to your story. It is more about looking at it critically and asking yourself, what am I saying? And does this make for an effective story? Okay? Okay. Oh, and also I'll just light this in one more thing, because I feel like I may not have described them enough, which is funny because this is about description. If you want, or when you want to describe how a character is talking through the dialogue tag, describe how they're talking. Use the act of description. Give us their body language. Give us their expression. Give us the way that their eyes are looking at the other person. Give us everything about it. Treat it as though describing a live performance. Thinking about it helps me a lot. But okay, enough about this. Let's move over to the bonus question of today's episode, which deals with a similar topic: the passive and the active voice. I recently put up an additional podcast, an Omakase extra, on my guideline for revision. The things that I look through, the things that I recommend checking out. And a couple people and one of my friends reached out to me for additional advice on the passive voice. And I totally understand where the confusion was coming from, because the passive voice is a sneaky little thing that it requires a little bit of time to get used to spotting in your own writing as well as in, other people's writing. The passive voice is a kind of description or narration in which the subject of the sentence is not the one doing the action. The reason why passive writing or passive voice is ineffective is because as the reader is picturing what you're describing, they picture the focus of the sentence as you have written it out, but that focus is not the one doing the action at the core of the sentence, which leads to the feeling that the focus of the sentence, the person that we're imagining in our head, is just a passive actor in what's happening to them. The easiest example that I can give you of how unsatisfying a passive sentence can seem versus an active sentence is, and I need a name of a character. I guess the first one that comes to mind is Natalie. Natalie was eaten by zombies. Natalie was eaten by zombies. What do you picture when you hear that sentence? Natalie was eaten by zombies. In my mind, well, as I am registering the sentence, I picture Natalie, and then I just picture zombies just immediately swarming that person out of nowhere, because those things weren't established, and the action itself that is happening is not related to Natalie at all. Now compare that to the zombies ate Natalie. As I register the sentence, I imagine zombies. I imagine them pouncing on this person and devouring them. Suddenly, that feels more active. You can see what is happening as it is happening through the description of that sentence. Natalie was eaten by zombies. Feels as though after the fact. It feels like a news report. It feels as though something impartial, something disconnected, something almost uninterested with what's happening compared to the zombies ate Natalie. I want to just imagine a chapter ending with either of the two following lines, She was eaten by zombies, or the zombies ate her. Just think about a chapter that ends with she was eaten by zombies versus the zombies ate her. Now, this wasn't particularly the problem that one of my friends was having with this. In fact, they reached out to me because through the act of writing their current project, they saw that in the act of giving exposition regarding the cool, cyberpunky, post-apocalyptic setting they were writing on, they realized that they thought that their writing was passive because it used was as the connector between the focus and what was happening. I forget the examples at this moment, but it was instances such as the corporation was founded on so-and-so by the hand of so-and-so. And they reached out to me and said, Max, is this passive writing? Is this the passive voice? And the quick answer to that is, no, it isn't. Because the focus of the sentence is the focus of what is happening at the moment. You're describing the origins of a corporation. It's not about was. Was is not the kingpin that comes to, spotting the passive voice. And this brings me back to what I was talking about earlier. It's not so much about hard rules. It's about critically analyzing what you're writing, looking at it and asking, what am I saying here? What am I really saying here? One of the easiest pitfalls when it comes to writing, and especially when it comes to rewriting or revising, is just reading your story. Just reading it without thinking about anything, just reading it and hoping that something happens. That's like the number one thing that I want you to never do when you revise your novel. Don't just read it. Read your story with a goal in mind, something that you're going to be looking through, something that you're going to be searching for. This pass, I'm going to fix all the typos. This pass, I'm going to make sure that every scene transitions well. This pass, I'm going to look through the dialogue and check and make sure that the speaker of every instance of dialogue is clear. Even in scenes where there's only one person talking to themselves or a whole crowd of people talking with each other. Sure, in some passes you can kind of put together 2 or 3 goals because, you don't have to read the whole book just to look through the dialogue, but it's to come in with a goal. I can't think of a least effective way to spend your time editing than just, I'm gonna read it again and see what I find this time. That's the easiest way to spend weeks just moving commas around. Not to paraphrase that old Oscar Wilde quote, yesterday I took out a comma, this morning I put it back in. Which it is part of the struggle. I have literally done that this past couple of weeks. I'm like, I don't like this comma. And then the next day I'm like, but it really needs it for flow. That's part of the struggle. But you have to come into revision with a particular goal in mind. And one of those goals should be, at one part of the process, or several, be looking at your writing critically. What am I saying? What do I picture when I read this passage? Is it the description that I want my readers to see? There's a high chance that they won't picture everything one-to-one, but you have to make sure that you're giving them the best guidelines that you can. You don't want to leave things up to interpretation, especially if you really care about certain things. If you really care for the reader to know something about your character, then you should most definitely let them know. And make it clear. So once again, and I like that one of my friends made this very clear, there isn't a hard and fast rule when it comes to passive versus active writing. The guideline that I offer, because it's the one that's worked for me the most in the past and in my experience, my advice, my opinion, what works for me, etc., 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 is to look for sentences where the focus of the sentence, the real focus of the sentence, is not the one at the center of what's happening. If the subject of the sentence is itself passive, it's what's happening to them, then you may have in your hands a passive sentence. Thankfully, though, those are very easy to fix. All they need is just a little bit of rephrasing. But as always, not a hard and fast rule. A guideline from yours truly. The surefire way, though, to find these and countless other parts of your writing that may be ineffective is to look at your writing critically. And now, before we call the show a show, I want to leave you with a few words. Recently, I have had developments in my life. Random encounters of life. The kind that make you go, really? Now? I just survived a boss fight 2 minutes ago. You're gonna give me another encounter? Those kind of things. And sometimes I feel that it's easy to get really disheartened. And it's really easy to look at those things happening to you and think to yourself, someone must be after me. But that's not the way that it is. Life isn't that way. We're not fighting the game engine. We're not fighting each other. Life is life, and the things that happen along the way, the happy and the unhappy ones, are both part of the experience. I want to inspire you to keep on working on your projects, no matter how long it's been, no matter how hard it seems, no matter how far away it feels. Get back on the road. I've been editing this novel for a long time. It feels like it's been forever. But I can almost see the summit. It's almost there. I can feel it. And once I get there, I've been there before. I've been at that summit several times before. And I'll tell you, once you get there, you just forget about how long it took you to get there. You stand on that summit, looking out at the beautiful, clear blue sky. Always midday. Always a victory. And you think to yourself, yeah, didn't even seem that hard. And why is that? Well, because we're always living in the present. We're always going somewhere, doing something, catching something, being someone, hopefully being who we really are. Time is always moving forward, ticking forward. Every day we draw from the pile of cards and we get our latest random encounter. Sometimes they're peaceful days, sometimes they're scary days, but life keeps moving onwards. Those 4 years of high school just gone like that. Years of college, semesters that seem as though they would be the most impossible things to overcome. Done. That presentation you were terrified of doing. That one person you were afraid of asking out. That one thing that you thought would be the most horrible day of your life comes and goes. Because we're always living in the present. The only thing, I think, that matters sometimes, because we're creatures of the now, is to ask yourself, how will I live today? And that was Omakase, episode 15. Hi there. I hope that today's podcast was insightful, and I hope that if anything I gave you another point of view, or just offered you a nice moment of respite from the random encounters of life. Oh, that was nice. That was nice. It was nice to just talk for a second. We never talk anymore. We're always busy with work. We keep saying we're gonna hang out, but we never do. It was nice. I hope that you enjoyed the episode. I'm gonna go give the shout outs, but you know, I hope that between now and the next time we meet, that you tackle something scary. Even if that scary thing is getting up from the bed. Okay? Okay. And now, welcome back to the end of the video club, where we stay until the end of the video, though you don't have to. I will be giving shoutouts to every single lovely people who pledges $1 a month on my Patreon page. As part of the end of the video club promise, there will be no edits. No edits. Also, just realized that I haven't checked if I got new coffee donations, because I also shout out coffee donations during the segment. Oh, I think I know who it is. I think I know who it was. Wait a minute, that's 2 notifications. Oh! Oh my god! Oh my god. Oh my god. Are you serious? Who did this? Who did this? Who did this? Who did this to me? Okay. Someone left a donation on my coffee page. That is ko-fi.com/mkaren. And I'm so mad. I'm so mad now. Alright. Well, I will shout you out at the end. You clever you. Hey guys. I'm laughing now. That's funny. That's hilarious. I love it when someone calls me out on my dumb jokes. Hi there. Now, in alphabetical order, every lovely person who's pledging $1 or more on my Patreon page, patreon.com/mkieran, starting with A. Howard, Atalak, Alistair Baywood, Alisa Dudley, Amelia, Amy Palmer, Angela. In case you're wondering, Max, why aren't you doing fighting game callouts again? And that is because that killed my voice last week. I actually, the next day I was like, what's wrong with me? Why does my voice sound like, why do I suddenly sound? Like, what does that voice sound like, Max? What does that voice sound like? And I'm like, hi there. You know what that voice is? That voice is the voice of the pervert character in an anime. It's like, hi there. Hi, ladies. So that's what I sound like whenever I destroy my voice. That wasn't funny. That wasn't funny. That wasn't funny. That bit didn't go anywhere. Did I shout out Angela? You know what? Better make sure I shouted Angela. Angela! Anyexo Hoshi. Biting the sun. Blarg. Oh, what if I do all the shoutouts in that creepy voice? The next one goes off to Brenda. C. Richards. No, never mind. Backing up. I feel gross just using that voice. Caitlin. And the other Caitlin. Sorry, I'm laughing thinking of the coffee donation I got. I will read it out in a second. Cannibal Lily. Carriette Eccleston. Kathy Lindsay. Lishadra. Christiane. Christine Dennis. Kristen Dennis. Kristen Dennis. Kristen Lofton. Oh no, why am I going into my cow person voice? Kristen Lofton. Citro. Clam Pastor. Oh, that feels good. That feels good. That voice feels good. See, unlike the other voice, man, for all the work that I put into all these voices, you would think that I would be getting any sort of, like, voice work. I'm not. Yuri Lowenthal won't return my calls. Did I shout out Clem Pastor? Better make sure I shouted Clem Pastor. Clem Pastor! Dwayne Jackson. Eleanor. Eleanor. Aerosos. Gilbert Goodrow. Heather Tasker. Irina. Phoenix. Isabella. Doucette. Janosch. Hybatsky. Jaytona. Kirkwood. Jeffrey. James. Williams. Okay. That bit also wasn't funny. You're right. You're right. Joe! Juan Nunes. K.M. Anderson. Kamishore Rao Shaluri. Kaylee. Kiel. Kid Lee. Lazy! Lier Killo. MT Locatelli. Mark Maruska. Mary Foster Smith. Nicola. Okay, random car in the background. You do you, my man. Nicole Grissom. Nicolay. Noam Sahar. Why is that car so close? Why is that car so close? Can you hear that? Am I crazy? Talking about things I thought would happen today. I thought my cat was gonna make some noise. He's been napping the whole time. Ah, he's so cute. He's like little, like his paws are like twitching. Like he's sleeping, he's dreaming. He's dreaming of like catching some big fat birds, huh? Oh yeah, he's happy. Alright. The car's gone. My cat's asleep. Let's move on with the shoutouts, novels, and tomes. Pablo. Pat Eichson. Polly Craftwell. Raquel Fernandez. Roa. Shimmertails. Sky. D. White. Soulmuse. Sylvia Leitilla. Synexia. Thomas Baker. Wendy Christopher. And shoutouts from my coffee box. Picky Date. Pickydate. Pickydate. Pickydate bought me a cup of coffee. And with the comment, clickbait. I'm so mad. On the previous podcast, I think I was talking about how someone left a comment on my guide to how to plan a novel, calling it clickbait, in spite of that video being 56 minutes of me giving you a real workshop for how to plan a novel where I go step by step. So I have no idea. I have no inkling of an idea as to how someone could call that clickbait when it clearly isn't. Alright, thanks. all undercase. Or all lowercase, excuse me. All lowercase were letters clickbait. And I'm like, darn it, picky date. That's funny. That brightened my day right there. That's good right there. And now, I want to say first and foremost, thank you for tagging along. Thank you for tagging along until the end. Thank you for enjoying the silliness. I hope, honestly, that you have a lovely day. The random encounters of life, they will be there. They will happen. We don't have a lot of control over when life punches us in the face. But what matters at the end of it all is not how we had a bad year, how we had a bad month, a bad week, or how much yesterday sucked. What really matters at the end is how we tackle today. So if today's over for you, rest up and get ready to fight on tomorrow. And if today is young for you, then stand up. Today is still yours. If life throws punches, then guess what? Keep on fighting and punch back.